Hello. In this lecture, I'll discuss the British settlement of Australia beginning on the 26th of January 1788. The establishment of British colonies across Australia had a dominant cultural influence on the nation, whose national identity became relatively indistinct from its British roots. So, how did Australia become an English-speaking country following British customs and British legal and political institutions? While he wasn't the first European to come to Australia, not even the first Englishman, as the pirate William Dampier had been here in 1687 and returned to chart the northwest coastline in 1699, it is the arrival of Captain Cook where the usual origin story of a British Australia begins. Cook left England in 1768 on a scientific expedition to Tahiti to track the transit of Venus. Once this task was complete, Cook took up a secret quest to sail on to the Great Southland, Terra Australis. Cook sighted the east coast of Australia on the 20th of April 1770. He mapped the coast and claimed it for Britain in August 1770, naming it New South Wales. After the American Revolution, Britain could no longer send its convicts there, so in 1785, orders were issued to establish a penal colony in New South Wales on the land claimed by Cook. The 11 ships of the First Fleet, commanded by Captain Arthur Phillip, arrived in Botany Bay in early 1788. Finding it unsuitable, they moved further up the coast, arriving in Port Jackson on the 26th of January 1788. The British flag was planted and formal possession claimed for Britain. Phillip named it Sydney Cove. They were here to stay. The British takeover of Australia had begun. This act was part of European colonialism, which began in the 15th century and reached its peak in the lead-up to the First World War. A colony has foreign rulers by definition, but many colonies were also settled and so eventually became settler societies like Australia. A settler colony is one where the colonial power sends inhabitants of its own country to settle another and transform it, thereby into its own image. Apart from Australia, there are many other settler societies. The Americas are completely made up of settler societies. Settler societies typically dispossess the indigenous populations, whereas other forms of colonial rule merely exploit them. Settler societies are receivers of many aspects of the mother society's economy, culture, and outlook. But over time, the differences grow as the settler society adapts to a new environment. And it must be said they never really begin with an exact cross-section of the mother society's population. This is particularly the case for Australia, where British settlement was a prison society until 1868. This led to the idea that Britain merely settled Australia as a dumping ground for its huge number of convicts. It was certainly the case that overcrowding in the prisons could be eased and the sentence of transportation would supposedly provide an additional deterrent to crime, but there seems to have been more to it than that. Firstly, there's the possibility that trade opportunities in the region might be exploited, perhaps in spices or flax and hemp. And also, the British hoped a presence in the southern hemisphere could be established for strategic and political reasons. Britain at the time was in competition with France to be the dominant world power, and Britain knew that France was interested in Australia. Nevertheless, Most of the first British settlers to Australia were convicts. In all, 160,000 men, women and children were transported for criminal offences in Britain. There has been a lot of debate amongst Australian historians as to the impact of these convict beginnings on Australia's culture and identity. It seems that the convicts evolved their own culture and values and their own accent and vernacular in response to their new environment. It is suggested that this is the origin of many Australian characteristics such as egalitarianism, larrikinism and suspicion of authority. British authorities also provided assisted passage to try to create a free society, but it wasn't until the gold rush from the 1850s that free settlers came in large numbers. People arrived from all over the world to seek their fortune, including about 40,000 from China. There are also Afghan cameleers arriving to help establish the overland telegraph and inland railway. And Kanakas, forced labourers from the Pacific Islands, brought to work the cane fields. Such diversity was seen as a threat to the tenuous British dominance of Australia, leading to the introduction of the White Australia policy as the first Act of Parliament in 1901. Non-white immigration was restricted until well after the Second World War. Government policies for most of the 20th century were specifically designed to ensure a British Australia remained ascendant. Britons made up the majority in Australian society. Prior to World War II, 90% of Australians were either British migrants or direct British descendants. After the war, British subjects were encouraged to migrate to Australia under assisted passage schemes, which helped with travel costs and provided housing and employment on arrival. Over 1 million British migrants dubbed £10 POMs were settled in Australia under these schemes. It's little wonder that British language, customs and culture have endured in a modern Australia. I'm Diane Colman. Thanks for watching.